What is up, guys? Del Boy here. So Scott Fitzgerald defeats Anthony Fowler by a split decision in what was an upset victory. Scott Fitzgerald going into this fight was a 5-1 underdog, I believe. Anthony Fowler was a big favourite going into this one. But, the bookies' odds didn't matter, and Scott Fitzgerald really boxed a career best fight, to be honest. The fight started out fairly lively. The early rounds were really competitive. The first 3 rounds in particular, they were really close, really competitive. Both guys were having success with their jabs. Anthony Fowler was being more aggressive. Fowler was trying to find those big power shots, those big hooks, those big body shots, whereas Fitzgerald was more cautious. Fitzgerald was waiting for the openings before he took them. He wasn't going gung-ho. He wasn't taking unnecessary risks. He was kind of boxing a safe fight. So the first 3 rounds were, very competitive, and in my opinion, they could have been scored either way. I preferred Scott Fitzgerald's work, but, the rounds were sufficiently close that, Anthony Fowler's work rate and aggression could have kind of offset that. So yeah, the first 3 rounds, like I said, close, could have gone either way. But after round 3, round 4 onwards, I felt Scott Fitzgerald really started to take over. He really became the ring general. On the outside, Scott Fitzgerald really bossed it. His jab was superior to Anthony Fowler's. He was walking him onto that jab at will, rocking the head back. Also, from the outside, Scott Fitzgerald timed his right hand well on several occasions. Fowler would try and lunge in, but Fitzgerald would take a half step back, counter with that right hand, and Fowler kept on walking into that shot. Also, I enjoyed Fitzgerald's bodywork in this fight. It wasn't done on a consistent basis, but when Scott Fitzgerald went to the body, I felt it paid dividends, and, Fowler didn't really like it. In fact, as this fight went on, Fowler really was getting fatigued, and it was noticeable, to be quite honest. And maybe that was partly down to the body shots that Scott Fitzgerald was throwing. Fitzgerald was throwing the left hook in particular to the body. That was a really good punch for him in this fight. So yeah, round 4 to round 8, basically it was all Scott Fitzgerald. He was outboxing Anthony Fowler. He was judging the distance really well, landed some good right hands, out-jabbing Fowler, outboxing Fowler, and he was building up a lead on my scorecard. Fowler was trying to land that big shot, but, he was looking slow, he was looking stiff, and he was looking fairly ordinary, to be quite honest. But to Fowler's credit, he didn't stop coming, and in round 9, the determination and no-quit attitude nearly paid dividends. Fowler lands a lovely right uppercut in round 9 that badly hurts Scott Fitzgerald. Scott Fitzgerald spends a good minute, 90 seconds reeling around the ring, hurt badly, and Fowler's chasing after him, landing big shots. But Fitzgerald refuses to go down, and he weathers the storm. In fact, the last minute of that round, Scott Fitzgerald actually lands a couple of good right hands, one straight right hand and one right uppercut. So despite it being a terrible round for Fitzgerald, he finished it fairly well. Going into round 10, the last round, Sky Sports had it a close fight. I think Johnny Nelson somehow had Anthony Fowler winning. I believe Carl Froch had Fitzgerald by 1. So Sky Sports had it really close. I felt it was wider, but regardless, the commentary team basically said it's down to this last round. And, that's how it played out, to be honest. Round 10 starts fairly lively. Both guys, looking to stamp their authority. Fowler being aggressive as usual. But, around midway into the round, Anthony Fowler gets caught with a lovely right uppercut, followed by 2 left hooks. And Anthony Fowler is dropped heavily, to be honest. And, he said in a post-fight interview he wasn't really hurt. I beg to differ. Look at his legs. His legs really stiffened when he got dropped. I think that was a heavy knockdown, and it was quality work by Scott Fitzgerald. Anthony Fowler beats the count though, and he holds on for a bit, and after that he kind of regains his composure, he regathers his senses, and he tries to apply pressure on Scott Fitzgerald, but Scott Fitzgerald moving on the back foot, trying to stay away from Anthony Fowler. He feels he has it in the bag at this point, and Scott Fitzgerald sees out the round and does enough to win the fight. Scott Fitzgerald won this fight by a split decision, and the scorecards, I believe, 2 of the judges had Fitzgerald by 1, and the other judge had Fowler by 1. So the fight really was dependent on that last round, and if Fitzgerald never scored that knockdown, he would have lost. And in my opinion, that would have been scandalous, because I felt those scorecards were way too close. Yes, Anthony Fowler had his moments here and there. Round 9, the first 3 rounds were also fairly competitive, but there was long stretches in this fight where Fitzgerald was the boss, and he clearly won this fight, in my opinion. The Sky commentary team were biased, in my opinion, especially early on in the fight. They kept on talking about Anthony Fowler's world-class jab, how it was busting Scott Fitzgerald up. Well, I was seeing the opposite. I was seeing Scott Fitzgerald jab land at will. I was seeing Anthony Fowler's head rock back on numerous occasions. Yes, Anthony Fowler was also landing jabs, but to me, Fitzgerald's looked the more consistent, and it was landing at a more regular basis. So, yeah, I wasn't really sure what the Sky commentary team were watching when they was calling this fight. They must have been seeing a different fight to me, but it's Sky Sports. What do we expect? We expect that these days, to be honest. Terrible, biased commentary. You can tell Anthony Fowler was the house fighter, or the A-side, as they say. So, yeah, good fight. Glad the right man got the decision, and Scott Fitzgerald really performed well. The most impressive aspect of his performance, in my opinion, was his composure, actually, because, Scott Fitzgerald has a reputation of being a bit of a nutter, and in the build-up, he was trash-talking a lot. And if you read some of his social media posts directed to Anthony Fowler, they looked like the ramblings of a madman at times. And I wondered if, Fitzgerald's erratic personality would show up in the ring, and maybe he'd lose his composure and, get reckless and get beat that way. But, to his credit, he maintained brilliant composure, and it makes me wonder, was the trash talk of Scott Fitzgerald a ploy all along to get Anthony Fowler wound up and emotionally involved? Because I felt Scott Fitzgerald's composure was remarkable at times, to be honest. He really carried himself well. But yeah, good fight. The right man got the decision, and hopefully now we see Scott Fitzgerald versus Ted Cheeseman for the British light middleweight title. That would be a really good fight at domestic level. I think stylistically that fight should gel quite well. As for Anthony Fowler, he can come again. He can have some good fights at domestic level, but, he does need to improve on a lot of areas, technically and mentally. But I wouldn't write him off just yet. I did think he showed some good heart in this fight, and I felt he showed some good perseverance. But, he does need to sort his head out, because he's very arrogant, and you can tell it gets the best of him. He went into this fight believing Scott Fitzgerald had no chance whatsoever, and that Scott Fitzgerald was below him. And you could tell when Fitzgerald was taking his shots well, when Fitzgerald started to have real success, Fowler really looked shocked, and he didn't know how to respond. And I think that's an attitude problem. And actually, his coach Dave Caldwell admitted as much on a Boxing Social interview he put out after the fight. It was actually a really revealing interview, to be honest, and I would recommend you guys watch it. But yeah, Anthony Fowler suffers his career first defeat. Scott Fitzgerald pulls off the upset. Really good fight, really good night of boxing. Share your thoughts below. Peace.